All right, in this video, I wanted to do a little short explanation about internal family systems. Many of you probably have heard of it, IFS for short, and I found it extremely helpful in interfacing with mind-body symptom recovery. And the reason being is because most of our chronic symptoms or a mind-body symptom initiates because of emotional repression. And people will think, well, I feel my feelings, and I try to, feel my feelings when things happen, and that's great, but what happens with emotional repression is that we don't even know they're there. It's there, okay? And oftentimes what emotional repression will do is the brain will perceive one emotion as dangerous, but another emotion is not dangerous, and so it will keep the dangerous emotion unconscious, and it will actually default to a more safe emotion. And this is what was happening with me. I was like, I always feel this one emotion, but I never feel these other ones, right? So with IFS, internal family systems, it's a great application that's actually pretty simple to start to show the brain that emotions are safe. And that's it in a nutshell, that the unconscious emotion is safe. So that is one of the benefits of doing IFS. But the main benefit of doing IFS is that what we're doing and where we come from is we stabilize ourself as the self, as the true self. And the true self is basically our true nature. It's the self that isn't affected by our programs and our conditioning, our environment, or our circumstances. It's a self that is just pure awareness. It's a self that is calm, stable, confident, and clear. All right? And this self is what starts to stabilize our whole inner environment, right? It has a very dynamic energy when we bring it into places that don't feel safe. In IFS work, either the therapist grounds out as the self, or the therapist invites the client to start aligning as their self. And that's the most ideal, is we want the client to start stabilizing as their self. And then what we do is we bring this into what's called parts work, okay? And there's different approaches to parts work. What I use is the classic Dick Schwartz internal family systems. And when I was on my own recovery journey, and it had been quite a long time for me to try to implement these strategies that I was learning from my coach, my symptoms were not reducing at all. And I still had an energy in me that wasn't fully allowing my symptoms to be there, which is where we need to get to for symptoms to start to fade, okay? If we have an energy that is still in resistance to the symptoms, the brain is still going to perceive that the symptoms are dangerous and will keep them going. So I use the term allowing. We want to get to a place where we can allow our symptoms, right? Allowing is something very inclusive. And this is the philosophy of parts work, okay? We have different kinds of parts, and parts work is interesting because it's going to be different for everybody. But basically, we have these different kinds of categories of parts. Now, the repression part is what we call an exile. That energy or that emotion, that child was told at a certain age that anger wasn't safe, or fear wasn't safe, or something wasn't safe, or it was overwhelmed when it was feeling too much. And so the brain started learning ways to keep it repressed, okay? And this is what we call an exile. And sometimes these exiles can be hidden due to trauma, abandonment, neglect, serious abuse. I mean, exiles are hidden aspects of our consciousness that are hidden because they don't feel safe. They've never been allowed. And this is a very important term to remember. Okay? So when I discovered that there was some energy in me that wasn't allowing my symptoms, they weren't being allowed, and so they couldn't reduce, right? And then I started learning parts work, and I discovered that there were these other places in me that weren't allowed. And like I explained before, emotions and physical symptoms, they come from the same place in the brain. They come from the limbic part of the brain, which is a very primitive part that sends the pain message. If pain and emotions are coming from the same part of the brain, they kind of have the same function, right? So if I'm not allowing a part of my consciousness to be here, I can't allow my symptom to be here, okay? And when I started making that connection, I was like, holy cow, this is a game changer, right? It's not about me trying to allow my symptoms, it's about me learning to allow all the parts of myself, okay? Now, to get to these parts of ourself that are unconscious takes a little bit of skill. It takes a little bit of strategy. And this is where the self comes in, okay? The self is this confidence. It's this dynamic energy that has this purity. It emits safety. It emits unconditional love. Because that's what it is, right? Now, if only we could just take the self and meet the exile, all would be well. But we have what are called managers or protectors. And managers and protectors are what our consciousness has developed in order to keep that exile safe and hidden, okay? They manifest in lots of different ways, but for me, what I discovered is they mostly manifest as thoughts. And, you know, we're taught in all these spiritual circles, just ignore your thoughts. They don't mean anything. Well, in parts work, they really do. They're protectors, they're managers, and they're designed to take us away from the exile. And have you ever noticed that your thoughts are usually around other people and situations and maybe what's going to happen or what did happen? It's everything away from the exile. It's a distraction, which is another key, because your symptoms are also a distraction, okay? When the thoughts don't work, the brain sends a symptom instead. So we have like double layer protectors going on. So your symptoms are also a protector, a distraction from the exile, okay? When we do parts work, we need to make friends with the protectors first, because they are also parts We can't judge them. We can't hate on them. We can't push them away. We can't just tell them to go. They're part of us. Think inclusivity. We're including all our parts. If we're the self, they're all part of the whole, okay? We want to allow. Protectors are trying to do their job. They've been probably doing it your whole life. They're exhausted. When the self steps in and asks the protectors, hey, you've been doing a lot of work trying to keep this safe. The protectors are going to go, that's right. They've been going and going and going. If you look at your thought patterns, look at how exhausting they are. Look at how exhausting it is just to look at them. Okay? And if that's a part of consciousness, it's an exhausted part. It's been working so hard to keep this mind-body complex safe. Okay? So working with IFS, we come from the self and we start making friends with the protectors. We start to get to know them. We start to familiarize ourselves with how our protectors attempt to distract us from the exile, from the vulnerability, from that scared, terrified place, okay, that's unconscious. So oftentimes when we first start this work, we have no idea what's in there. And I've seen this over and over and over again. And, you know, like I said, everybody's different. And some people's exile can be really ready to be met and allowed and embraced. Whereas some other ones are very, very hidden. And they're like, we're not coming out. And so what we really start to establish is we start establishing a relationship of trust between this self, this true self, the protectors, and we start to make contact with the unconscious. We start opening the door to the unconscious so that there's whatever's in there can slowly feel that it's safe. Okay? And when that starts to feel safe, and then when you start to recognize that this part of you is completely worthy of being allowed to be a part of you, that there's nothing wrong, okay? And of course there are strategies, okay? There's definitely different skill sets in that the practitioner needs to learn to get that exile to come out and feel completely safe and completely allowed and completely part of the whole, not needing to be hidden away. And remember, the exile didn't choose to be hidden away. It was just the brain learned that it wasn't safe somewhere down the road, okay? So that there's no fault, there's nothing wrong, there's no bad, okay? And once the exile does feel safe, then we can start to maybe work with it and give it new experiences that bring in more of a healthy developmental stage, wherever that exile might be, okay? But once it's allowed, once those parts are allowed, I guarantee you, then the other part, the protector part that is manifested as the symptom, however severe it might be, can also be allowed. because they're coming from the same place in the brain. And it's this allowing energy that softens everything, because allowing is coming from the self. And that's all it needed to be done in the beginning, right? And it's such a beautiful thing to do with the parts and aspects of our consciousness that have been hidden away and covered up forever, for a long time. I've been working with myself, and I've discovered parts that have been there. I don't know, they felt ancient. So this work is pretty phenomenal, that I've seen that once you start making friends with all your parts, including your thoughts, the thoughts, they're like, oh, good, we can take a break, right? And I have a little visual that they're out there on, on the beach now. They can rest on the lounge chairs and just take a break, because they're not needed. And when thoughts empty out, and it's peace, it's a very lovely environment to be in, right? So that's my little explanation about IFS. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, I have found that it is a very, very powerful work, and it's a great skill to have, and of course, not only stabilizing as the self, but increasing self-energy in your life can only bring good things. Okay, all right. Be well, everybody. Thank you.